Hey everyone, welcome back to the day 7 of React Design Pattern series. I hope you are enjoying it. You have already seen container presenter, control uncontrol, compound components pattern, render props pattern, higher order component patterns, and custom hooks pattern. And if you have come this far, please pat yourself at the back. So today we are going to talk about another very important pattern that holds your app together. It's called the provider pattern. And yes, I promise by the end of this session, you will never be scared and afraid of the context again. So what are we going to cover today? We will learn what is provider pattern. Of course, that's the main thing. Then we are going to learn about what kind of problem it solves. We are going to talk about what is context. With provider, context come automatically. Then a mini project to explain provider with context with and without React 19 in picture, then multiple providers and context, how they work together. Then we're going to talk about context in React 19 way. Then we're going to talk about the use cases, ideas that you can build using this pattern, a few pitfalls and anti-pattern, and finally the task. Let's start simple way. The provider pattern is about providing something. So what it provides? It provides data, it provides functionality. To whom it provides? It provides to your application. When we talk about application, it can provide the data and functionality to the entire application or a part of the application. Then the question comes, how it can provide to the entire application versus part of the application. We know in React, your application is nothing but a component hierarchy or the component tree. So with provider pattern, you can provide the data and functionality to your entire component tree from the top to the bottom or a part of the component tree. It all depends on your use cases. We are going to see some of them when we're talking about the real world examples. To give a definition of the provider pattern, we can say it in this way. The provider pattern is about providing data or functionality to parts of your React component tree without having to pass those data and functionality through props in the multiple levels. Let's understand this with some visuals. Imagine you have a deeply nested React tree, like you have the app component, and then below that you have a header component, then below that you have a navbar, under that you have a profile, under that you have an avatar. Imagine this is your component tree, and now all you want to show, you want to show the name of the user in the avatar component. Let's say the name is tapaScript. That's what you want to show over there. But to achieve that, what you do in general is you start passing the props. For example, here you're passing the user prop from app, it goes to the header, then from there it goes to navbar, from there it goes to profile, from there it goes to avatar, which is a big problem. And unfortunately, you have just entered the prop drilling, the prop drilling hell that we talk about as one of the problem in React. And the provider pattern exactly going to solve this problem in much more elegant way. Prop drilling, it makes your code really harder to maintain. It gets things tightly coupled and is very fragile. The main problem with prop drilling is when a component in the middle of this chain, for example, you have app, header, navbar, profile, and avatar. Think about header, navbar, and profile. They don't need that user information at all. It starts with app, but to make it reach till the avatar, you have to pass it through all the layer down, and then only it goes to the avatar, which is not that cool. Now, when you talk about the provider pattern is powered by something called the React Context API. We are going to understand that with hands-on. So the React Context API allow you to share values between components without explicitly passing the props through every level. The problem that we have seen just before. It seems it allows you to pass the same information without passing through all other components in such a way that you can directly query that information in whatever the level that you are looking to access that information, provided you have configured this information provider in a specific way. With props, we have seen that you can pass the props from one component to another component in the component hierarchy if at all your components are fall in the hierarchy. What if there is a component which is not part of the hierarchy? Now still that component might need the same information that the other components in your hierarchy is getting. So in that case, prop is definitely going to be a very challenging solution. That's where context come into picture. In the same way that how you get the information within the hierarchy without the information being passed through all the components in the hierarchy. If a component is not part of your hierarchy, using the context and using the provider, you can still pass the same information to that. Think of it like a broadcast tower, like the radars. You put up a provider at the top, and any component in the range of that radar, they can tune in to the broadcast using something called a use context hook that we'll see in a while. As we have defined provider as something that can provide the data and functionality in your component hierarchy, imagine context is a mechanism using which you share those data and functionality across components. Okay, so context is something which is like a boundary for a particular use case to be available in your component hierarchy. So you define the boundary, like from this component to this component boundary, I want the user information to be available. From this component to that component boundary, I want the theming information to be available. So this is how you define the context. Now within this context, you have to provide the theming information, you have to provide the authentication information, you have to provide the user information, brand information. To provide that, you use the provider. I hope you are clear about the provider and context. Context is the boundary within which the data or the functionality should be available, and provider is the way you provide that information within that context boundary. Okay, the more we see in the code, the better we understand this concept. Now you might be using context and provider for a while, but you might be using it from the syntax point of view. The thing that I'm trying to put over here from more understanding point of view, because that's when, if there is a problem in using provider and context, multiple providers, multiple contexts, we are going to see them in a while, you will be able to understand where exactly the problem is happening, because understanding the context boundary and how provider and context are related is very important, not only syntactically but also from the conceptual perspective. Before we start coding, let us understand what are the steps involved for this provider and the context to come together using the provider pattern. Let's go through the steps. You also note down, and then we'll pick up each of those steps one by one and we'll start coding them. So the first step is about creating a context. Using React library, we have to create a context, which is the boundary. Then we will create a provider and we will define what kind of data this provider is going to provide within that context. Then we are going to wrap our component hierarchy, either the entire application component hierarchy or a part of the component hierarchy with the provider, so that the data availability will be only within that hierarchy. Getting the point? And then we'll apply a pattern called a hook pattern, which we have already seen in the previous session, to make this context available. Okay, and then last thing would be use the data that you got from the context from the provider wherever you need within that component hierarchy which provider wrapped. Here I have a React project and the project name is provider pattern because that's what we are learning today. And I have created this project in the same fashion that I have done for all the previous videos, so not repeating that again. And in the provider pattern, I have my source code inside the src folder. So the first thing that we are supposed to do is creating a context, right? So for that, let's create a new folder called context. Inside this, let's create a file called index.js, and inside this file we are going to create and manage the context. To create the context, React provide an API. The API name is create context. So import create context from React. Now create context is a function, is an API. Using that you can create any number of context. If you have noticed that I have created a folder called context, inside that I have created a file called index.js. My intention over here is that whatever the context I'll be creating for this application, all the context I'll be creating inside this index.js file and will be exporting them from here, so that elsewhere if I need this context I can just import it. Okay, instead of creating separate file for each of this context or creating the context irrelevantly in another file, I prefer to keep them together like this. This is the code style of the standard that I follow. That's what I'm teaching you. Now the context that I am interested to create, let's create a theme context. Let's start with that. What is a theme context? It means that we are talking about theming as a functionality. Theming means we know the light theme, dark theme, all these things all together, right? So you can provide dark theme, light theme, or the custom theme to an application pretty easily. Now, to make that theming information available throughout the application and ability to change that from light to dark, dark to light, etc., the theming information should be managed in a centralized way. So we think that context could be one of the best thing, because if your application grows and it is having a huge component tree, passing this theming information using props drilling from the root of your component tree till the leaf of your component tree would be humongously difficult. And tomorrow, if there are more components coming up, you have to again modify your code to pass the theming information through props, which is really challenging. So instead of that, we'll be keeping this information in the context somewhere centralized place and can use that wherever we need. So let's create the context first. To create the context, let's create something called a theme context, because we're talking about theme here. And we just need to call this create context method from React over here. This gives us the context. And from here, I'm just going to export theme context. That's all about the context creation. As I'm done with the context creation, the next thing that I'm going to do is creating the provider. For that, inside src, let's create a new folder called provider, and we will be creating a provider for providing the theme information, right? So let's create a new file called theme provider. If you have noticed that for context, I have given .js as an extension, but for provider, it is JSX. Is because inside provider, we are going to return certain JSX. So it makes sense to give the extension as .jsx. Provider at the end of the day is a React component. So let's create a provider, an arrow function, and it is going to return something. Okay, what is going to return? It's going to return a JSX. Now here we are talking about the theme context, and provider is going to provide something which is related to theme. Now to relate it to theme, I want this provider to tell whether we are in the light theme or the dark theme, that information. And second thing, I want this provider to tell that there is a function or there is a functionality using which we can toggle the theme from dark to light and light to dark. Now theme information is a data. So if we consider theme provider is a React component, and if it has to manage data, it has to manage state. To manage the state, we will need the hook from React, which is useState. Great. Now let's create the data or the state, which is theme, and the updated function called setTheme, and we are initializing it with false. Let's imagine that true means light, false means dark. We would have done it like light or dark also. We could have put it a string saying light, initialize, toggle it to the dark. We can do the same with the boolean value also. All right. And as we have defined this theme, let's also define a function called toggle theme. Its job is to just toggle the theme. That means I have the set theme updater function. I can take the previous value, which I know it has to be a boolean, and then just toggle that using the negation operator. Okay, so if it was false, it will be true. If it is true, it will be false. And along with that, let me also toggle a class name called dark at the body level of my document. So we can do something like document dot body dot class list. It has a method called toggle, and we can have a method called dark. Okay, so it means that every time the toggle theme gets called, a class called dark will be added to the body, or it will be removed from the body. Now in our CSS file, we can have a class declaration, say body.dark, where we can make, the background is dark, foreground text color is white, all this way. Or we could have handled the entire theming part using Tailwind CSS as well. I already have a video where I have showed with React 19 and Tailwind how to do this theming application. So I'm not focusing much on that because our focus is on understanding the provider pattern. Okay, so I have the theme information, data, and the functionality, which is like the toggle theme. Now I'm interested in this JSX part. From this JSX part, I have to return the provider. Okay. Now, how do I get the provider? The way that I can get the provider is from the context itself. So I can get this theme context, whatever I have created before. And from theme context, I can get something called provider and can return that. Now, one of the things to note over here, and we're going to see also in React 19, we have something called context as provider. So in React 19 onwards, the context itself act as a provider. Here we are explicitly getting the provider from a context. If you're using React 19, you don't have to really use that dot provider. Using this theme context alone will be enough. We're going to see some of that code after we finish this. We'll refactor the same code to make it React 19 compatible. All right. Now I have the provider. Great. Now the provider should provide something. Provider will provide something called a value. Now using this value, I can provide any kind of data in my context. So what data we are planning to provide? We are planning to provide this theme, and other thing that I'm planning to provide is this functionality through which this theme can be toggled. So this is what I'm going to provide, these two things. So far you're following me. Great. Now it is fine. This theme provider is great. Now this provider has to wrap a component hierarchy. Now the component hierarchy in React can be a children to another component, right? Children is a special props. We have learned it from our previous session, and the children can hold by itself a bunch of a component tree. So this theme provider can take a children and can wrap these children all together. Okay, this children itself can be a component hierarchy. This is what my theme provider is. Now the last thing that I have to do, or last two things that I have to do, first export this theme provider. And I think this error is coming for the prop types. Yes, let's add a prop types for this children, and of course I have to import the prop types. So this is my provider, a simple React component that takes a component hierarchy as a prop, and then it defines what kind of data and functionality it has to provide. Then the JSX part, it gets this provider from the context, and as a value it provides the data and the functionality, or either of them, and whatever the component hierarchy I have passed, it just wrapped them. That's what the provider is. So I have the provider ready, I have the component ready. Now the third thing, if you notice, that we have to do, we have to wrap our component hierarchy using this provider. Now we're talking about theme. The theming should be applicable at the complete application level. So if I think like that, entire application, my React application's entry point is main.jsx. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to import the theme provider. After importing the theme provider, inside my main.jsx entry point, I have this app. Inside app, I might have header, I might have content, I might have sidebar, etc. All these things. So that means I can wrap using this theme provider this entire app, which itself can be a root of a bigger component hierarchy. So it means that whatever theme provider provides, the theme data and the toggle functionality will be available not only to this app but also to its children. So our third point is done. Now what we want to do, we want to go to this app, which is app.jsx file, and we want to use this theme and the toggle functionality over here. Now to do that, we want to use a pattern. Let me talk about that. This is where we'll be using the custom hook pattern that we have learned in the last session. So let's create a new hook, new folder. Let's create a hook. So hook folder, and here the hook name starts with use. So use, we'll call it as use theme.js. There is a mechanism, there is a way that you can get that value and the functionality that the provider is providing from the context. For that, you have to first get the context, for example, import theme context in our case, okay? And then you have to get one hook from React, which is called use context, okay? And then you have to do this particular coding syntax. You have to call use context, passing your theme context, and this is what is going to give you that value. In our case, theme and the toggle theme. Now theme and the toggle theme, okay, fine, you are going to use in app.jsx. What if you are going to use the same thing in some other component also? Think about a case like we have a context for user role, whether user is an admin or non-admin, and based on whether user is an admin or non-admin, we want to show certain navigational item in the sidebar. We want to show certain component into my home page. That means if I am managing that user's role information, whether admin or non-admin, in the context, I have to get that context value, whether user is an admin or non-admin, in the sidebar component, also in the home component. In two places, I have to query the value from the context. Now, I just now said that to query the value, you need theme context, you need the use context. Then using the use context, you have to pass the context to get the value. So this part of the code you have to repeat in multiple places, 3-4 lines of code. Instead of that, we can create a hook and we can use this hook instead, because this is what we have learned in the previous session, that custom hooks are like your utilities in React, but it also has the knowledge of React in it. It means that it can use React's own APIs, own hook, the one that we are doing right now using the use context hook. So let's create the hook then. To create the hook, I have to create a function. I'll give a name called use theme. I am using an arrow function over here. So first thing first, I'm going to do is use context passing the theme context, and this is going to give me that value that provider is giving from here. This is the value. This is what it is going to give me. So I can take this guy in a destructured form and I can say const theme and toggle theme I get from here. As I'm getting this, I can just simply return this theme and toggle theme, whatever I am getting. And finally, I can export use theme from here. That's all. That's pretty much it. This is my hook. And you understood why I had created this hook, right? Now, as I have this hook, I know wherever I call use theme, it is going to give me automatically this theme and toggle theme from the context automatically. I don't have to write all this code again and again. Now let me go to app.jsx file. Let me delete all these aspects. I'm not going to use them. Only thing that I need over here, this is how I like using the design pattern. Only thing I need here is the use theme. That's it. I don't need anything else. So anybody looking into this code, find it really, really simple. Now, as I imported use theme, I can use this particular hook, and this hook, we know that it returns me the theme and the toggle theme, right? Now I have theme and toggle theme. Using that, I can do whatever I need. So this div, let me remove this class name, and here let me add few styles. The first thing on this div I want to add is a background color conditionally. What is that? If theme is true, then let's consider it's to be a light theme. So background will be white. Okay. Otherwise, consider it as a dark theme. So make a darker background. If it is light theme, means if theme is true, then the text color should be black. Otherwise, text color should be white. And let us also put a height of 100 VH so that entire area will be covered. So this is the style I have written conditionally using this theme. Okay. Now inside this div, let's add a nav, a navigational area. Add some layout to it, like flex layout, some kind of background color to it, a bit of padding to it. And inside that, two things we're going to add. One is a heading, where we are just going to say this is a my app. And along with that, let us take a button. On click of this particular button, we are going to toggle the theme. So this is where this functionality is what we are leveraging. Let's add some style to this H1, making the text little bigger. And below nav, let us add our main area. Over here, we can just test our theme change using if theme is true, that means we are in the light theme. Otherwise, we are in the dark theme mode. Also, let's add some class name to this P to look it better, like a little bigger text. Also, you can make all this text look little bit center using a text center in the main. I think that's pretty much it, what we have done, right? Let us go back to our steps once more. So we have created a context, we have created a provider, we have wrapped the component hierarchy with a provider, we have created a hook to make the context available, and we have used the data from the context at least in one file called app.jsx. So everything we have followed, whatever the steps that we just now told. Now let us test this application and do localhost 5173. Okay, I have my app, I have dark mode, I don't see the button. Only reason that I can think of is I have not added any text to that button. I do that mistake very often. Okay, so let's say change theme or toggle theme, whatever we want to add. Maybe toggle theme is the right thing. Now let's go back to browser again. Yes, I have the toggle theme. If I click on it, we see the mode is changing. Okay, light mode, dark mode, light mode, light mode, dark mode. We could have done same thing with Tailwind CSS also, but just to demonstrate the fact that we have a context, we have a provider. The provider can wrap the component hierarchy. Whatever area it is wrapping, it means that starting with app downwards, the value that the provider provides, which is nothing but this theme and the toggle theme, will be available. To make it available in multiple places with a lesser amount of code, we have created a hook. So instead of doing this thing again and again in all the component, wherever we wanted to get the data from the context, we can just have one line, which is like importing use theme, and from use theme get the thing. After getting the theme means the value and the functionality, what you want to do with this value and functionality is completely your use case. That's what we have demonstrated over here. I hope you understood how the things stitch together, able to visualize the thing. People say that if you do things multiple times, what happens? It goes into your brain and mind very easily. So we are going to create one more context, one more provider, one more hook, and one more way to get the data from the context. But we just don't want to do it for the namesake. We are going to do it to show you that how multiple providers and the multiple contexts can work together. So let's see that. So let us create another context, and the context that we are interested in is we'll create something called say brand context. Brand context means let's say some brand, let's say tapaScript, which has a logo, has a name, has a color. So let's create a brand context. So it means that whenever you're in the application has certain kind of brand value, its logo, its color, its background color, etc., the typography. You want to use that element of the brand throughout the application, just like theme, right? Another use case that we're talking about. So let's create that. We are going to go very fast now because we have done it slowly for theme. So first thing first, we are going to create a brand context. We created a brand context. As we have created the brand context, we have to export it so that we can use it elsewhere. Context part done. I'm going to close this. Next thing, you're going to create a brand provider. So I'll be creating a brand provider.jsx. Our brand provider looks like this, almost same to the theme provider, where I need the brand context, and it's a React component which can take a component hierarchy in form of children, and it is going to provide the brand value using this value attribute using this provider. And what it is providing a brand value. As we have to manage and maintain this value inside this component, provider component, we needed a state, a brand state, just like we had the theme state before, initialized it with null. Now imagine that we make an API call. Our brand information is stored in some DB, let's say MongoDB. On top of that, there is an API written using Express or Nest.js. We query that API to get the brand data. So we keep the thing inside use effect. It makes that call. And as we get the data, a fake call, we update the brand using the set brand updater function. And finally, we are providing this brand value to the entire component hierarchy we'll be wrapping. So this is a simple brand provider, just like our theme provider. Now the next thing what would be, we should wrap it. So for that purpose, we'll go to the main.jsx. Coming here, I'm going to import my brand provider. Now here, you will be learning like the multiple providers you can actually nest. So for example, I have theme provider. Inside the theme provider, I can use something called a brand provider and wrap my hierarchy like this. So you see over here, the theme provider was there before. Now I have another provider called brand provider. I am putting that outside of my component hierarchy altogether. So now the app component and its child component will have both theme and the brand information. If I had the requirement of using the brand information only to a particular component hierarchy which is inside the app, I would not have wrapped app component using brand provider here. I would have gone to that particular component hierarchy. Inside app there could be profile, inside profile there could be user, inside user there could be preference, and I need it only from the user. I would have gone to that hierarchy. I would have wrapped the brand provider only there. So this is how multiple providers can stay together, can be stitched together. Now, as I have the brand provider giving the value, the next thing, of course, I'll be doing over here is I'm going to create use brand.js hook, which is pretty much like before our use theme. Imported the use context hook, got the brand context. From brand context, using the use context is got the brand value and returning the brand value from here. And finally, we are exporting the use brand. So now I can go to app.jsx just like before. Now, only thing I need over here to get the brand is use brand. Then I can get const brand equals to use brand. And if I go to brand provider, this brand will be finally an object which is having the brand name and the color, right? In this case, tapaScript, and this is hard coded, but ideally it will come from an API call. So I can do brand.name to get the brand name, brand.color to get the brand color. So let's see if I get that or not. As I have the brand, I'll go to this main below this theme P. Over here, let us have a div maybe. And here I can check if the brand information is available. In that case, inside a paragraph, let's do brand dot name. That's all. I can even put a background color equals to brand dot color. So the brand will be in that particular color, isn't it? This is awesome. So let's go to the UI and see whether this is coming or not. Yeah, I can see tapaScript coming already, right? So I can still toggle. My toggle thing still works along with that. And the brand name is coming over here. So what we have seen over here, we have seen the usage of two providers, two context, for different area of data handling. One is for theme, another is for brand, how they wrap the things, how possibly they can wrap a different section of the component hierarchy, and how the multiple providers can be wrapped and can create a hierarchy of provider itself. In React 19, a few things have changed. The way that we look into the provider pattern, we look into context, right? The first thing that got changed now is something called context as provider. You would have seen for both the occasions where we have dealt with theme and brand, we had to get the context inside the provider and had to do theme context dot provider, brand context dot provider. Now in React 19 onwards, context itself is a provider. So context come as a provider. So some extra coding that we used to do, the context dot provider, we don't need it. We can wrap using the context itself. That's the first change. Second change, the hook that we have created, the custom hook, use theme or use brand. We had used our React's API or React's hook called use context to get the value basically. Now that also you don't need from React 19 onwards because React 19 provides a new API altogether called use. So let's go ahead and refactor our code. Okay, so first thing I'm going to go to brand provider. So context as provider means this context dot provider, this provider part you don't need anymore. You can just wrap it using the context itself. That is enough. You don't need to do dot provider. Now the second thing, the second change that you have to do is wherever you want to get the value from the context. In our case, it was happening into these hooks, whether use theme hook or use brand hook. Coming here, we had something called use context. In use context, we used to pass the actual context to get the value from the context. Now this use context hook you don't need anymore because React introduced something called an use from React 19 onwards, which you can use to get the value from the context or to get the resolved value from a promise in React in both the cases. So one use case that we are seeing right now, using the use API, we can get the value from a context. So these two things that I have changed, wherever you have provider, you don't have to do dot provider again, and you don't have to use context. You just use the use API. It sounds little bit odd, use the use API. Use the use API to get the value from the context. Now my application will keep running because I am using React 19, and one of the way where I am dealing with brand, I'm using the React 19 updated modern APIs. The toggle mode is still using the old APIs, dot provider, use context, etc. Right? So I hope this is clear to you as well. To get all the code, you have to come to github.com/tapaScript. Please feel free to follow it because I have plenty of other repositories you can look into. Come to repositories and then you'll find 15 days of React design patterns over here. Feel free to start this repo if you like my work. And we are at day 07. Once this video is published, you will get a day 07 folder. Once you go inside that, you will be able to see all the code along with a task.md file where I'll be giving you some task and assignments in a while. We have already seen a couple of usages of provider pattern using the context is with theme, with branding. Similarly, you can use it for authentication. Once authentication is done, you can get the token and you can preserve in the context. You can actually provide the login, logout, all these functionalities using the authentication management provider, authentication management context, and the hook pattern, provider, context, hook, all three things together creating the pattern. You can create an authentication management system. Second thing, you might be knowing about the internationalization or the multi-language, like same application you can run in Hindi, English, Bangla, French, etc. Now, how you can change the localization or the internationalization of that application from one to another for the entire application, you can use context over there. One of the beautiful usage is with the e-commerce application where you want to purchase certain items and you add the items into the cart. Cart is again a centralized place which is available top right or bottom right corner of your application and is always visible to the e-commerce user. You can use that. You can use the context. You can also use it for your feature flags, A/B testing. Very, very useful, the context APIs, the provider patterns, provider context and hook altogether. To mention certain pitfalls and the anti-patterns, first let me call out a few rules that you should keep in mind while using these provider patterns. Again, these rules are applicable very much in your production grade application. You have to keep in mind. One is keep your context scope as narrow as possible. Yeah. What does it mean? Unless it is things like a theme, right? You might not want your context to superpower or overpower the entire application's component hierarchy. So make sure that you select the separation of concern right way, that where your context should be applied, only that particular component hierarchy is what you need to wrap. First thing. Second thing is the data that you're putting, the provider is providing the data. Don't provide everything. Whatever is really relevant for your context, your provider, respective provider, should provide only their data. You should not have one gigantic provider that provide theme data, brand data, user data, authentication data. No, boss, it's not like that. Segregate, separate out your context, and your provider should provide only that relevant data for that context. That's it. And only on the relevant component is what it has to wrap. Please, this is what you need to keep in mind, and this is where many of the production grade application fails, because developers have not thought out enough while designing this. Then wrap again only what is needed. I spoke about that. And the last point would be avoid frequent updates in context. What happened once you make an update in context? Very important. It actually re-renders all the consumers. Okay, so let's say you have a provider and you provide a certain values. Using context, you are getting this that particular value in three different components. All your three consumers will be re-rendered if your provider updates the value. So make sure frequent update is not happening. Use provider pattern along with context for the things where you have a requirement of getting the data maybe at once or very infrequently, like you adding to the cart. Users won't add to the cart just by clicking multiple times, 100 times, tak, won't do. They will just do it whenever they feel doing it. Very infrequent for one particular user. Similarly, theme data or getting a user data, getting an authentication data. Wherever you have the frequent updates, please be careful, because you will end up re-rendering your consumers which is consuming the values out of context. So once you break these rules, that is when you create anti-patterns, and that is when the problem comes. Otherwise, provider pattern and context really rock. All right, so finally let us talk about the task. I'm not seeing too many people are completing their task yet. Maybe you guys are busy, but if you're following this, please follow it with your full heart, because I'm giving a lot of time to create a quality content. You also give time to not only listening to me, not only just viewing the lecture, but also completing the task and post it on our Discord. So task for today is pretty simple. Build a authentication context and provider. We have already spoken about it. It should have user information if it is authenticated, or user will be null, and some way to know whether user is authenticated or not. For that is authenticated, a boolean value. Then provide the login and logout two methods, two features that providers should provide, and then consume it in the navbar and the dashboard components. Okay, so these two components you have to consume that. So it means that you don't have to really consume it in the entire application. Create an application where you have a dummy navbar or a dummy dashboard component. Just consume the relevant values there. Why I'm saying relevant values? For example, logout, it makes sense to consume in the navbar. You don't need it to consume in the dashboard, right? Whereas you need to consume the user information or the is authenticated information maybe in the dashboard. So things like that. Then build a language context, the localization thing. Store selected language and toggle it. Update display text dynamically across the components. Because this is probably for entire application. And so two different kind of things that I have given, and you'll have a bonus point if you can combine these two with the multiple providers things that I have taught you. So with that, we are done with day 07. It would be great if you could subscribe, if you could provide your support, if you could let me know that how this is going, you are enjoying this or not. Very soon I'll be coming up with the next day 08, where we'll be talking about another pattern. Till then, take care of yourself, keep learning.